Good afternoon. It's global tea break time. Come and join in. I am drinking out of my own face again today. Look at that. I've decided it's Alex mug time today, so drinking out my own face again. Another beautiful day outside. I won't get such great weather at the minute. I've just had my decking delivered, which is exciting. So that's a weekend job, is putting the new decking down, which is good. Not that I really have weekends. Every day is a weekend, and every day is a work day as well. I also managed to dress as Where's Wally and as the American flag today. I don't quite know how I did that, but I seem to have put on my pyjama bottoms that I don't normally wear pyjama bottoms, but I did today, and I now look like the American flag. Hey, patriotic, but not to the country I live in. Anyway, hope everybody is doing well today. Now, very, very exciting news, and I hope some of you have seen this. I have spent the last 4 or 5 days fighting with my website, trying to get it up and running, and it's been a lot of work. I've also spent the last 24 hours fighting with Instagram, and frankly, if coronavirus doesn't get me, then Instagram may well finish me off. But what I have done is I have managed to update my website so that now you can actually book things with me. Now, let me show you what you can book. Here, I've done a little, because I'm so amazing at this. I'm so getting into the hang of this now. This is my website. You can either donate down there or click here to book a tour. And then, now it's a bit prettier. It seems to have squished the website, but there are pictures on the left and then there's a book button on the right. You can do a virtual tour. So this is what I'm doing now. You can book me basically to do a virtual tour for your family or your group of friends, whatever, either as a one person dialing in or one group dialing in, or if you have a club or a group and you want to do more than that, then we can do that as well. And then here are all the gift vouchers that you can buy for tours that will be happening when we finish doing all this crazy stuff. So if you want to do that, I've put a few up there. What do I put up? I can't remember now. So these are the virtual tours that you can book, and these will be done via an online platform. They'll be an hour long on whatever topic you like. But then the ones that I've listed are Harry Potter, because I love Harry Potter. There's also a skip the line option for the 9 3/4, street art, women's history, Glorious Greenwich, blood and guts. Oh yeah, blood and guts. And then there's a general gift voucher if you don't know what you want or you want to buy one as a gift. And they're £15 each, which is a standard walking tour cost. So there we go. And then you can redeem them. What we'll do is once we are back up and running and everybody is allowed out again, I'll then email you and with a variety of different dates, and you can book on to whichever date you like. So that's what I'm doing. So please go and take a look at that. I actually have no money coming in, so I thought I'd try and be creative about it. So there we go. Now, what are we doing today? Well, today's Global Tea Break, she says, desperately trying to post and pin a comment, here we go, is on the origins of weird London street names. Now, for those of you who have visited London before or who live here, well, there are a variety of kind of crazy street names that are around London, and we don't always think about where they're from. But what is really cool is that if you look at the street names, you can get quite a lot of history from them. Now, some are really, really obvious, and I've got a picture of some of them, not all of them. But some are really obvious. So let's start way at the start with something like Oxford Street. Now, Oxford Street is the heart of shopping in London. It goes right through the middle, but ultimately, all you need to know about that is that is the street that would lead you out to Oxford. So, you know, directionally, it's pretty easy. You know where you're going. There's another one, Cambridge Circus. There's a variety of roads like this where if you wanted to know where you were going, there you go. You find that street and off you head. But there's a lot more interesting ones. Now there's some really weird names like Throgmorton Street here, and Throgmorton is very simply the name of a person, so you get that as well. Somebody who has been influential in that area, in whatever period of time in London, and they have their name put to a street. I always say that if you have made it in the UK, now, you know, forget all the kind of earls and dukes and all of that. If you have made it, then you have your name put as the name of a pub. I think you could probably also say if your name goes on a street name, you've made it as well. So leaving aside the obvious and slightly dull ones, I want to take you to one of my favourite little spots to show people in the city of London. Now, I have a little video here because there is a street that runs through the centre of the city of London called Cheapside. Now, I think I can't remember, I think I have zoomed in on this, but just sort of straight down the middle, kind of going across, you'll see there's a street called Cheapside. Now this is an old English word meaning market. So as a result, all the streets going off, and you can see just here, just going down, there is Bread Street. They have the names of the different things that were sold there. So markets and all of that going along. You can now see pretty much right in the middle, I think I'm zooming in on it, is Friday Street. Now Friday Street's an interesting one because of course you don't sell Fridays, do you? Or do you? You actually would sell fish there, and this is where the fishmongers would live and the Friday street market would be, because we would eat fish on a Friday. You can also see as we move up, the street just here going up and down is Wood Street. There's also Honey Street, there is Milk Street, and if we were to go off down to the right hand side, down the bottom, you would also come to Poultry, and Poultry was the name, very simply, of the poultry market. It's now one of the shortest streets in the City of London, but Poultry is there. Now there is a little street around here, and I don't know if I got it. Oh yes, I have. In far left now, the one that goes up and down is called Gutter Lane. Gutter Lane. Now, you can obviously tell from this that it's not necessarily the nicest of places. It's possibly a bit grim, but Gutter Lane is actually not necessarily as nasty as it might have sounded. Gutter probably, we think, comes from a Danish name. Oh, now I just want to draw your attention to the one just sort of going almost horizontally there, which is called Love Lane. I'll come back to that in a minute. But Gutter Lane was from a Danish name, probably something like Gudrun, but it was then developed, and we believe now as well, it became the place where jewellers and what they call sort of gold beaters would be. So they'd be making jewellery, and the gutter was a sort of slang term for your throat. So sort of think about necklaces and that kind of thing. But it does originally come from this Danish word, but eventually sort of ended up kind of helping out. Now, Love Lane that we saw is one that is a little bit saucy maybe. And in fact, I'm going to come back to that slightly because there's another street just close to this area which we spoke about on the Great Fire of London, and it's called Pudding Lane. Now, pudding for us in the UK is dessert, so that means, you know, apple crumble, sticky toffee pudding, something like that. However, Pudding Lane is not quite as delicious as all that. Laura mentioned the other day that pudding was not a lovely pie or a dessert. It was actually packages of offal that would be sort of packaged up, bound together, and then taken off on transport to be thrown simply into the River Thames. Delicious. So Pudding Lane, don't be fooled. It is not necessarily the nicest one. And there's another street in this area called Ironmonger Lane. So you can see that these names take their, or these streets take their name from whatever used to happen there. You can also take it from industries. Now, if we were to go over to the East End, then I'm going to just take this off for a second because that's no longer valid. If we were to go over to the East End, we would find Artillery Lane, which is where crossbows and things like that would be, it'd be kind of shooting training. Brick Lane, where they used to literally make bricks. And one which, have I got a picture of it? I'm not sure if I do. No, I don't, unfortunately. One which is a street that I really like, which is the name of, which is called Tenter Ground. Tenter Ground now is not a wildly exciting street. There's a new building that's just gone up alongside it. But Tenter Ground talks about the weaving, particularly the silk weaving that was there from the 17th century. So the French, the Huguenots, the Protestants that came over. And what they would do is they would weave their fabrics, and then they would put them on these hooks, which were known as tenter hooks, and you would stretch them. And so Tenter Ground is where a lot of the weaving workshops and houses would be. Now, I'm sure you've heard the phrase to be on tenter hooks, meaning to be really kind of on edge and waiting for something to happen. Well, that's where it comes from. Again, this material will be stretched to the absolute maximum to you know, for the weaving. So being on tenterhooks is kind of being stretched to the maximum. Do I know the origin of Bleeding Heart Yard? Yes, I do, and I'm going to come to that in a little bit because we're going to get into our slightly more gruesome ones in a little while. There was also a street in the East End called Cable Street, which is where they would make ropes and things like that for shipping or whatever. So a lot of these streets take their name from the industries that were there. There's a lot of religious names as well, and I'm going to just bring up a little video here. Now, this site that you can see, this is our beloved St Paul's Cathedral. And what really broke my heart this morning when I did this, it says St Paul's Cathedral temporarily closed. We miss it. I love St Paul's Cathedral. But if we scan slightly to the left here, you will notice that the little kind of loopy street is called Amen Corner. The one going vertically in the middle is Ave Maria Lane. And just to the right is an area called Paternoster Square. And there is also a little bit further away, not on this video, one called Creed Lane. Now, it's fairly obvious. They are next to St Paul's Cathedral. They're religious streets, but why do they have those names in particular? Well, there is a thought which seems to sort of bear out in fact that in the medieval times you would have all of the religious folk, the knights and everything going up to the cathedral, and before they went in they would do a sort of big round and they would say bits of the religious texts in the different areas. So Amen Court, as you're seeing here, they would say the Amen, they would say the Lord's Prayer in Paternoster Row, Paternoster, Latin literally for meaning our Father. The Creed would be done in Creed Lane, and then the Hail Mary in Ave Maria Lane, which is literally, Ave Maria is literally Hail Mary. So they would do all of those little bits. And in fact, there is another street that I'll come back to, which is linked into that in a little while when we get to kind of the more exciting names. Now, let me just check which picture I have up next. Religious names as well, we can get some very interesting ones, such as this one here, called Crutched Friars. Now, I always used to find this name absolutely hilarious, because I just love the idea of these sort of friars. I don't know what's happening in there. Anyway, it's a really, really odd name and a really, really odd word. And where it comes from is very simply an order of monks that were there who used to wear a blue habit with a cross on the back, and crutched would be, or crouched possibly, would be a name, another word for crossed or cross. So essentially it's the cross on the back of their habits. I mean, these names, they're so bonkers, and they often come down to some very, very simple explanations as well. Now, the next one that is religious. Do I have a picture of this one? I don't think I do. No. Bevis Marks. Now, Bevis Marks is not, we do have a religious institution called Bevis Marks. It's not a Christian one. It is actually a synagogue, and it takes its name from the street just next to it. Now, Bevis Marks originally would have been linked to the Christian church. In fact, it was the abbots of Bury St Edmunds, which is slightly outside of London, who owned the area there. And the mark is simply a mark of the boundary or the property. So it's literally Bury's mark, Bevis Marks, and that's where the name comes from. Mincing Lane is another of my favourites, and I think I have Mincing Lane. Here we go, Mincing Lane. This is not to do with mincing of meat. It is not to do with having a rather excitingly sort of feminine swagger. No, none of that at all. But there is a feminine element to it. Mincing is a female version of an Old English word for monk. So an Old English word for monk with a feminine connotation, a nun. So Mincing Lane is where there used to be a nunnery. It's fantastic. I just love all these things. The thing about London and why I love it so much is there is all this history there, and all you need to do is scratch a little bit and the history just reveals itself. It's wonderful. Now, there's also some useful road names, things like Horseferry Road. Now, Horseferry Road, very simply, is a ferry that you would take your horse on, which sounds completely mad now. But if you think back, for the best part of 1700 years, London only had one bridge, and that was London Bridge, and it was small and it was busy, and so the majority of people, if you could afford it, would cross via a ferryman. There was only one place in London where you could take your horse on the ferry, and so as a result, the name is Horseferry Road, and you would know that's where you had to go to take your horse on the ferry. There's also actually a great story about Oliver Cromwell taking the horse ferry at some point and it sinking and him losing his horse. But whether there's any truth in that, I've no idea, but it's a great story. There's also another one, I don't think I have it actually. Do I? Maybe not. Called London Wall. Now, London Wall, most people who work in the City of London will know it because that's the heart of the financial district, and it's also quite a good thoroughfare street. But London Wall is literally along what used to be the old Roman wall. It's as simple as that. So again, if you are in London and you're trying to find out where you are, where you're going, there's a lot of little clues in those street names right there. Now, there's also some names, and let me see if I've got any here. Oh, this is actually one that I've missed out about being named after somebody. This is Savage Gardens. What a great name. And we know there's a band used to be called Savage Gardens as well. I would love to tell you there's a really exciting story. It's just named after a guy whose surname was Savage, and he owned this plot and had a big garden. But I just think it's wonderful. You know, you're walking past that and you think, oh, that's exciting. I wonder what went on there. There are some great names. No, I haven't got any pictures of them, that denote where people used to live. There is a street called Petty France, which is just around the corner from Buckingham Palace. Petty, P-E-T-T-Y. But it comes from the French, Petit France, meaning little France, because this is where the French would go, particularly Huguenots in the 16th century as well, would come and live. And so it was known as Little France. And that, you know, us Brits, we're not very good at languages. We managed to speak a language and then mess it up a little bit. So Petit France became Petty France. Nice and British. We also have a street called Old Jewry, Jewry. And this is simply where the Jewish community was. It's right in the city of London. It was kind of like a Jewish ghetto at the time, really, but it was slap bang in the middle, and it was called Old Jewry for that. Now, there's another French one, which has got a great name. It's called French Ordinary Court. Now, if you were to look at that, you'd have no clue what was going on there. But French Ordinary Court was simply, again, a place which was a French contingent that were living there. And they were allowed the ability to sell kind of coffee, cakes, but also meals to people. Now, a meal would be done at a fixed price. You know, they still do that in France today, the prix fixe menu. But back then they were known as ordinaries. So you would go to this French area and you have your ordinary, which would be your fixed price lunch. And so that is why it is called Ordinary Court. Gary, if you came in at the start of this talk, you'd have heard me talking about Cheapside meaning Market Street. Honestly, Gary, this cab driver, can't get rid of him. I love you really, Gary, honestly. Now, we go on to some slightly naughty or cheeky ones here. I mentioned earlier Love Lane. Now, Love Lane sounds gorgeous. It sounds really romantic. It's slightly less romantic. Love Lane does what it says on the tin. That's where you would go if you were looking to buy some love. Now, because I know that there are some kids watching, I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. You can make your own conclusions to that. And there's another street which was a similar sort of industry, and it was known. It had an incredibly rude name. It's now called Grape Street, but it used to be known as Grope Street. And there was also Grope something else in that name, which I'm not going to share with you today. You can look it up if you want to know. But Grope Street. So yeah, there's a few little cheeky ones around there as well. Now, for the kids, these are some brilliant ones. There is lots of streets named after poo. And this is where it gets really, really good. So there is a street in Covent Garden called Maiden Lane. Now, Maiden, you think, oh, pretty lady, lovely. No, Maiden, not at all. Midden is the word that it comes from. And a midden basically means a massive pile of poo. Dung heaps. That's disgusting. There's also a street called Cloak Lane, and you think, oh, Cloak, that sounds very Sherlock Holmes, Jack the Ripper, all very exciting. Cloak, no, it comes from an old word, cloaca, meaning sewer. So there you go, really nice as well. There used to be one street, well, there still is a street called Passing Alley. Now, Passing is not the name it started out with. It had a letter different, and it was an alley that people used to go in to have a wee. So it's not particularly delightful. There's also a street called Carting Lane. Now, Carting Lane is a great one because it used to have well, in fact, it still does have a street lamp in it. And the street lamp used to run off sewer gas. And the sewer gas meant that Carting Lane, everybody calls it to this day, Farting Lane, which I think is wonderful. So there we go, some fabulously kind of silly ones for the kids. Now, some weird ones. Someone asked about Bleeding Heart Yard. Yeah, absolutely, Bleeding Heart Yard. Now, Bleeding Heart Yard hasn't always been called that. It used to be another Cloak Lane, so another sewer street. But Bleeding Heart Yard kind of comes from a legend that says that there was a woman who was murdered, and her still pumping heart was left in the middle of Bleeding Heart Yard. Now, there's absolutely no evidence for this whatsoever, but it's taken on this slightly lovely romantic element. St Mary Axe. Now, this is a great one. St Mary Axe. Now, I wonder if you remember from Sunday, she says, talking really slowly so she can find the picture. Here we go. St Mary Axe is where this building, which we know as the Gherkin, but is actually on the street called St Mary Axe. St Mary Axe is literally St Mary and an axe. There's a church whose official name is St Mary, St Ursula, and the 11,000 Virgins. That is the name of the church. It's quite a long name. And the story goes that Ursula was the daughter of an old English king called Marius. She was sent off to Germany, and she took with her 11,000 virgins. I don't know why. When she got there, Attila and his Hun were not best pleased, and legend says that they chopped down and killed all 11,000 women with 3 axes. I mean, whatever. But it's named after St Mary, St Ursula and the axe. Now, why St Mary gets top billing and Ursula doesn't, I have no idea. But that is where that comes from. Knight Rider Court is another great one. Now, do you remember I mentioned earlier about the procession before going into? Have I got Knight Rider Court? Here's Bleeding Heart Yard. There we go. There's a little one there. No, I don't have Knight Rider Court. Before going into the cathedral, they would go and do a sort of a loop and do all the praying. And the street Knight Rider Court, it is not linked to that fantastic series in the 70s and 80s with David Hasselhoff and his amazing talking car. No, I'd love to say yes, but it is to do with, we believe, the knights literally riding through on that processional route. So it's a lot less exciting than you might think, but it's still pretty cool. I love the idea of all these knights kind of coming through this little alleyway. There's a street called Wardrobe Place. Bit weird. Wardrobe Place, literally where there was a wardrobe. King Edward II bought the land and had a huge royal wardrobe created. Kings, would have an awful lot, well, we still do, an awful lot of clothing, all kinds of cloaks and everything. And so this is literally where they would keep them, in the wardrobe. And there is even a church that is the name of the church by the wardrobe, which is just fantastic. Fetter Lane. Now, this is quite an interesting one. Those of you who are lawyers might know that in London, Fetter Lane is the street that kind of goes right through the middle of the legal district. Now, it comes from an Old English word, probably, we think, a word feuters or foters. And it was basically used to mean an idle person, because this is apparently the area that people would congregate, would drink and be up to no good. The fact that it goes through the lawyer district now, I am not going to make any comments about at all. One of my favourites, Man in Moon Passage. A brilliant name, again, probably named after a pub, we think. There's quite a few things, places like Angel in North London, named after pubs as well, but Man in Moon Passage, absolutely wonderful. Now, my last 2 for you are possibly my favourite. One is called Rotten Row. Now, Rotten Row goes straight through the middle of Hyde Park from north to south with a little bit of a wiggle in the middle. So it's in the royal area. It's very close to Kensington Palace. But Rotten Row, you would think, wow, you would allow a road that was obviously clearly very, very bad right next to the palace. Actually, no. It comes from us being rubbish at languages again. It comes from the French, La Route des Rois. So the road of the kings. And us Brits not being able to pronounce anything in a foreign language just made it into Rotten Row. And it's still to this day, it's called Rotten Row and goes straight through the park. Now, one of my favourites, there is a brilliant spot. It's not really in any kind of touristy area. It's just south of King's Cross, just up from sort of Clerkenwell area. And it's called Mount Pleasant. Doesn't Mount Pleasant sound wonderful? A sort of green fields and daffodils and butterflies and all sorts of lovely things. Mount Pleasant was a medieval word for basically a huge rubbish dump. It was a very sarcastic word. So I love the fact that the medieval Brits or medieval Londoners were just going, oh yeah, this is really horrible. Let's just call it Mount Pleasant. And there's quite a few Mount Pleasants across the world actually, but that's where the name for this one comes from. So there we go. That is the end of your little trot through some of the crazy street names in London. I'm just going to see if there's any questions. Tim says he recently discovered an ancestor who owned a brewery on Distaff Lane called Le Lamb prior to 1500s. Oh. Diane, I'm not going to engage with your comment there. You know what you said. Gary helpfully telling me that cheap is a Market Street. Thank you, Gary. Bleeding Heart Yard we have done. Fernando says London's campus adjacent streets. Old Queen Street by Birdcage Walk by Cockpit Steps. Yes, absolutely. Birdcage Walk, very simply, one of our kings used to like to keep exotic birds in cages there. But yeah, I like the campus adjacent streets. I'm going to steal that, Fernando, and not credit you at all with that. I think that's about it for questions. So there we go. That's our little fun stuff for today. What we're going to do tomorrow, it's Women's Wednesdays, and I think we're going to do Amy Johnson tomorrow. haven't quite decided yet. I'm lining up some exciting people to come on later in the week. I realise I owe you a menu for the next week, which I haven't done yet, but I will get that sorted. But in the meantime, please go and have a little look at my website. And if you fancy booking for a future tour, the gift voucher, or doing a virtual tour with me, I can do virtual tours literally right here, right now. So if you want to do that, I know some people emailed and said, oh, I was supposed to come to London in the next few weeks and I can't come. Let's do a virtual tour. Let me know if there's anything particular you want to cover. We can do, Westminster Abbey, Tower of London. We can do walking tours, anything you like. Come and have a chat with me. But thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Enjoy the sunshine.